Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our Thursday night football preview for Showdown and props tonight. Gonna go over everything you guys need to know before lock to go out there, build some of your Showdown lineups. That'll include a look at the injury report, some of the ownership trends heading into lock, some game scripts you might want to look at out there as well. And then on the prop side of things, we've got 4 props that I like over there on Underdog and Prize Picks that you might want to go out there and get some exposure to yourself. So a lot to talk about. It's not dilly-dally whatsoever, and hop right on in, starting off with the Showdown side of things. We've got our initial projections up here, and as per usual, this is just our first set for this week. So later today, the Patreon members will have the entire right side of the sheet filled out, where you can have my player poll, script notes, and all of that. But what we're going to focus on here is more so just some of the general trends heading into tonight's game. To go out there, get your research process started, and give you an idea for what the rest of the field is going to do. Whether you want to leverage off of that, or maybe incorporate some of those chalky pieces yourself, that's what we're really going to focus on here. So starting off with the injury report, there's really one main player that we have to keep an eye on, and that would be Devin Achane of the Miami Dolphins. He's technically a game time decision. I would say that he's probably siding towards playing at this stage, but we thought the same thing about CMC out there for the last Showdown slate, and he ended up getting rolled out last second. So rather than completely ignoring what would happen if that were to be the case, let's talk about who would get the touches for the Dolphins if Achane ends up getting rolled out. And that would be 2 options. You'd have Jeff Wilson Jr. down here at $2,400, and then also Jalen Wright down here at $2,000. I think that in either scenario, with Raheem Mostert out, that you're going to have both of these running backs active. The real question is just how much usage they're going to get. I would say that Jeff Wilson Jr., even if Achane plays, is probably going to get a solid 35 to 40% of the running back usage, and then you have another 5-10% going into Jalen Wright. I don't see Achane, especially if he's going to be limited out there tonight, getting all of that running back usage, but he's an extremely efficient back, even as the secondary running back out there to a Raheem Mostert has gone out there and posted some extremely impressive production already in his career. So if he's playing, I think he's in play, even if he's going to be limited. You might want to include him in a few lineups, but if he ends up getting rolled out, there would be some mega value out there on the Dolphins. Guys like a Jeff Wilson Jr. would project well over the 10 fantasy point mark, and then even guys like a Jalen Wright down here at $2,000 are probably projecting for at least 7.5 fantasy points. So that's the main injury concern that we have going into lock. And if he ends up getting rolled out, of course, a lot of that ownership is going to go to those running backs, which would kind of change the distribution a little bit. But let's talk about what we know about this slate. Starting off with a Tyreek Hill up top, who's expensive. He's a whole 17.4 out there at the captain slot, but he's got a lot of touchdown upside. I mean, his receiving yard line is pretty much at 100 receiving yards. And on a format like Draftkings, where you get a bonus for getting over 100 yards, that is absolute gold out there for the captain. You combine that with about a 50% touchdown rate out there with his anytime touchdown props, and you can see why he's projecting for over 23 fantasy points. And that is actually a little bit conservative compared to some of the other sites out there that have him at over a 24 fantasy point projection. So though it's steep, the price tag is, like up there with a CMC, like what we saw out there for the 49ers and Jets slate. I kind of understand why he's up there that high. So I would say a Tyreek Hill getting adequate ownership, got about 22% out there at the captain slot. If you have the salary to spend, if you're going to go with a Dolphins heavy lineup, I would say that any lineup that has Tyreek should almost for sure have Tua going along with it as well. As if he's going to get over 100 yards, get a touchdown, be the optimal captain, I can't see Tua not being an optimal flex play as well. Josh Allen, another great option to go out there and take it captain. He's a little bit lower owned than Tyreek at that spot, partially because he doesn't have that 100 receiving yard upside, but he's a quarterback who's capable of posting 3-4 touchdowns. And in a game where I think it's going to be very competitive, you got a relatively high total between these two teams, taking quarterbacks is going to be a premium, and I think a rushing quarterback like Josh Allen is especially viable out there at the captain spot. So I think if I'm going to go with any Bills heavy lineups, a lot of times I'm going to be using Josh Allen as my captain, as their wide receiving threats are really spread out. There's not really that one target like a Stephon Diggs like they used to have that was going out there and getting 30-40% of the usage at wide receiver and tight end. You've got Kincaid, who I guess would be the number one target out there on that team now, but Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Dawson Knox, you got a lot of different targets to go out there and try and feed, which makes it hard to pinpoint the right one. The other way that you could go out there and attack the Bills is just assume that Josh Allen's going to spread it out a little bit. So I think if you're going to play a Josh Allen captain lineup, you're playing that kind of script where not one of those specific targets goes out there and gets there. We already talked about A-Chain a little bit. Ownership is going to change quite a bit when we get that news. If he's rolled in, I could see him going up to like 55, 60% ownership. And of course, as he's rolled out, he's going to be pretty much unowned out there in GPPs. Tua's a fair price tag at $9,400. I would say that the ownership's pretty fair out there on him. And just like with the Josh Allen, I don't think that he's completely unusable out there at the captain spot, especially because he's only 8.3% owned. If he was going to be 10 to 12% like we've seen for some other quarterbacks here in 2024, then maybe I'd rethink it, but it's a high total game. His 1.5 touchdowns prop out there for passing is heavily juiced towards the over, all of which makes him a pretty decent play for tonight. James Cook, maybe my favorite captain play out of all of these, though, just because he is only 8.4% owned. And a lot of people in this high total game are going to go after those quarterbacks and wide receivers. I've already mentioned that I think both are viable, usable out there in GPPs, but the underused stacks are going to be the James Cook captains. I don't think a lot of people are going to use A-Chain at captain if he's out there playing tonight. If he's rolled out, I don't think a lot of people are going to use like a Jeff Wilson out there at the captain spot. I think that these rushing games are maybe the more differentiated way, right? The slightly sneakier way to go out there and stack some of this game, especially if you want to take a Bills heavy lineup. So I would say that James Cook, I'm not going to be as heavy on him as some other people out there in the industry, but in very correlated build, especially like a 4-2 or a 5-1 Bills stack, I could see myself using a lot of James Cook at captain. Jalen Waddle, very fair price tag. I would say in terms of points per dollar, one of the better plays you're going to get towards the top end of the board. So projecting for about 15.3 points, about 1.8x points per value right there. Ownership's pretty fair in that same range as guys like an A-Chain and a James Cook. So you're not going to get leverage on these sort of players, right, unless you go out there and you lock them into lineups. But they're also not that 60, 70% owned that you have with some of the other top-end options. Dalton Kincaid's a great bounce back spot. Was getting double coverage all day out there against the Cardinals, so really didn't do shit out there in week 1. So if you're looking to buy the dip a little bit, trying to get him at slightly lower ownership than we'll get for the rest of the year, Dalton Kincaid is probably my favorite play on the slate. So I'm going to be using him at captain. Over here on the right, we haven't figured out our player pool quite yet, but I can tell you for a fact that Dalton Kincaid might be my highest leveraged play out there on the slate, and I'm probably going to have at least 20-25% at captain. Reason for it is you're buying low. Week 1 is the week of overreactions. Around the league, you're going to see a lot of teams that look like complete world killers. You're going to see teams that maybe fell flat on their face in week 1, go out there week 2 and completely flip the script. You might have that team that looked invincible out there week 1, go out there and lose by 2-3 touchdowns, vice versa, right? Out there with each scenario. Every single year, it's the same story. We always overreact out there to week 1. And I think that the price tag and even the ownership here on Kincaid, he's sub 40%, is a complete overreaction to what we saw out there in week 1. He is a very talented player, a very athletic tight end. I think the number 1 receiving target that you even have on that team. So if he's going to be cheaper than some of the other options on there and about the same, if not lower ownership, then give me him all day. I will take all the Dalton Kincaid that I can. Khalil Shakur, also I'm going to go ahead and just group in Keon Coleman in the same conversation here. They're both about the same price tag, right about $6,000. Khalil Shakur slightly lower owned because he saw less targets than Keon Coleman in week number 1. And just like I said that you got to give, some slack out to the guys that maybe struggled out there in week 1, Keon Coleman's being a little bit oversteamed in my opinion. Now, do I think he's talented? Will be maybe the best wide receiver that you have on the Bills this year? Yes, I agree with that. I think that he's probably already better than what you have with Shakir and Curtis Samuel. However, and it's a huge however, people are treating him after week 1 like he is, for sure going to be the rookie of the year. He had the most targets. He was being, looked at down the field quite a bit out there in week 1, which are great signs, but it's a 1-week sample size. So if he's going to be much higher owned than Shakir, and as of right now, it's only about 10% difference. So I don't know if I would call it, big enough difference to go out there and make this decision. But if Coleman's going to be 15-20% higher owned than what you have with Shakir, then give me Shakir all day. He's the one with chemistry out there with Josh Allen. He's the one that's been in this system on the last 3-4 years, and I know they've changed up quite a bit over the last year or so, whether it's personnel or scheme-wise, right? They've had a lot of changes over there in Buffalo, but Shakir has been around and, been around Josh Allen for 3-4 years. I think that matters. I think that chemistry is going to show itself eventually, and as I said, if Shakir is going to be lower owned than Keon Coleman, then I'm probably going to put more shares out there towards Khalil. Curtis Samuel can't be overlooked, but he did have a very disappointing week 1. But just as I mentioned, we don't want to overreact to what we saw last week. So still in play at $5,400, does project the lowest of those 3 Bills wide receivers, but is also by far the lowest owned, out there at only about 13% total ownership. These kickers, these defenses are always going to be a talking point for people. They're not usually my favorite spots to go out there and get leverage on. However, I almost always play these kickers and defenses. I almost never go out there and exclude them from my player pool because they fit certain scripts. They're the kind of plays you go out there and correlate with the rest of your lineup. So for example, if you're going with running back, let's say maybe a James Cook at captain out there for the Bills defense would be a great spot to go out there and correlate with it. If you're going to get more rushes out there for your running back, that's going to mean, less time of possession out there for the other team, and coincidentally, probably a better score out there for the Bills defense. And you can say the same thing about the Dolphins lineups. You go out there, you take, maybe it's some of the backups, maybe you take even an A-chain out there at captain. Using the Dolphins defense wouldn't be the worst idea. If you want to correlate some defenses and kickers into the same lineup too, you could say that maybe the higher efficiency on defense is going to force more field goals. All of that is what you should be considering out there with your kickers and defenses. Ray Davis, backup out there for the Bills. I would say his way of getting there would be going out there and vulturing a touchdown, which is possible, but with Josh Allen and James Cook in the mix, probably asking a little bit too much in my opinion right there. Jonnu Smith, he is the starting tight end out there for the Dolphins. I'm projecting him for about 5 fantasy points, so nothing all that special there. Dawson Knox about 4 fantasy points, but Dawson's a backup tight end, so I'd much rather have a Jonnu Smith out of these 2 players, but both are more than viable for this kind of week. You can see I have Jonnu Smith about 5% higher owned than a Dawson Knox, but even with that 5% difference, I would still rather have Jonnu Smith, as he's going to have a higher snap share and a little bit more predictable usage out there for tonight. You have Jeff Wilson, Jalen Wright already mentioned where they could come into play. Even if A-Chain plays, I think Jeff Wilson Jr. especially is worth a few looks in some lineups. Ty Johnson, not my favorite play out there for the Bills. He did get a few snaps out there in week 1 though, so kind of like what you have there with Ray Davis. I guess you can't completely overlook him. Not the best play, not the most reliable play by any means, but in large field GPPs, in theory, could get there. And MVS is hardly going to play for the Bills, but does have deep play upside. So if you're going for a pure punt play, a pure flyer, maybe one of those top 3 receivers gets hurt, and you can get MVS there that way. Mac Hollins actually scored a touchdown for the Bills last week. So, in terms of a punt play, I think I'd rather have Hollins than an MVS, but it is only a 1-week sample size, so we don't want to overreact too much. Braxton Berrios, still getting some special teams work out there for the Dolphins, playing a few snaps here and there, out there in 3 wide receiver sets. Durham Smythe, always been on the Dolphins, is seemingly always a Miami Dolphin, and backup tight end, so just like what you had out there with Dawson Knox, could get there, but not the most reliable player. Wouldn't use him in like large, higher dollar contests, single entries, and that kind of thing. I would avoid him in those kind of formats. And then Julian Hill, Ingold, Dubois, and then Robbie Chosen down here. Chosen should be active out there for the Dolphins in week 2. He was active out there in week 1, but these would be like, if you're a 150 maxer out there in the big $5 or $25, just hoping to get something right. I mean, you might have one of these sort of players hit like once, maybe twice a year out there in the showdown streets. So personally, not my favorite plays. Might not even use them out there in my 150 max pool, but you can't, there's a reason why they're included on the projections. Like, for example, Alec Ingold, fullback out there for the Dolphins. He could catch a 1-yard touchdown. Like, he could. Is it likely going to happen? Probably not. That's why he's projecting for 1.5 points, but it's at least within the realm of possibility. Julian Hill, same thing, 3rd-string tight end for the Dolphins. Could he score, go out there and break the slate? Yes. Is it likely going to happen? Probably not, right? Let's be honest about it. Same thing with Chosen, right? He's going to be like the 4th, 5th-string wide receiver out there for the Dolphins. Could he go out there, score a touchdown on his 1 snap for the night? Sure, anything's possible out there for tonight's showdown, but I wouldn't count on it with these kind of players. The ones that are going to have a more reliable snap share, the ones that we've already seen go out there and put up some production, are the ones that you likely want to lean on, and that would be your Berrios, your Hollins, these running backs out there for the Dolphins. Even a Jonnu Smith at $2,800, that's where I'd be going for a lot of my value tonight. I think that these pure punts are exactly that. They're punts at the very best and should be treated like that out there in your large field GPPs. And now for the prop side of things. So gonna give you guys 2 props that I took over on Prize Picks and Underdog to give you an idea for some of the exposure that I'm getting to tonight. Of course, guys, if you want access to that spreadsheet that you saw before with everything filled out on the right side, make sure to check out the Patreon page. And of course, to catch all of these props before any bumps, make sure to check out the Patreon for that as well. I'll link in the description of the video to go out there and check that out. But that's where I'm posting all of these as I'm actually entering them. And out here on the Prize Pick side, figured out how we can actually get this to load for videos, but we did have one of these 2 props bump. So it didn't bump in terms of projection, but this Tua over on interceptions, I got without it being a goblin. So you can see this combination is 2.75x. So it's not like it's a very big multiplier out there on the Tua prop, but if you were on the Patreon page, you could have caught this at a slightly better number. So I at least want to point that out, but Tua is in the -130 to -140 range out there for an interception on books. And considering that the Bills have a lot of speed on defense, they're one of the better turnover forcing teams out there in the NFL, I went out there and took the over. Tua, by the way, went over his 0.5 interceptions line in about 65% of his games last year, and that was one of his better seasons out there in the entire NFL, right? Since he's been a rookie out there in the league. So that's why I took the over on that. It is a goblin now, or, slightly lower payout, I should say, but not the worst case scenario, right? It's only about a 0.25x difference. If you want all the best value, right, you guys know the Patreon is the place to be, but still a prop that I like. Still an over that I took, and it'll be a 0.25x difference out there with payout, but still hopefully it goes out there and hits. Then the other prop I took was this over on Khalil Shakir receiving yards. And if you saw the fantasy section, you guys know that I trust him a little bit more than Keon Coleman. He's got the chemistry, he's got the experience out there with Josh Allen, and on sportsbooks, he's at 41.5 yards out there in most books. So I know it's only a 1-yard difference. It's not that much sportsbook line value, right, if we're being honest about it, but he's a player that in general that I wanted to look at for an over. And when you give me a 1-yard discrepancy, that's just the cherry on top to go out there and take the prop myself. So I took his over in receiving yards, the over on the Tua interceptions, which slightly worse payout than what you would have gone before, but still pretty decent all things considered. And then over here on the underdog side, about a 4x paying card. And personally, I did have an over on Jalen Waddle receiving yards, but this was at 62.5. So that ended up getting bumped up 3 yards. So what we're going to go with here is actually an over on Tua passing yards. So there's a little bit of correlation here between these 2 props, as if James Cook is going to score, if they're going to go out there and get a lead, just because he scores, right, doesn't mean that they're going to go out there and get a lead. But, if the running back for your team is scoring, that is a good sign out there for your team's production. So I'm going to take the over on James Cook touchdowns. We'll talk about that more in a second, but I'm going to run it back with, like I said, I took the Jalen Waddle over in receiving yards, but Tua over passing yards would be a lot of the same. Because if we're going to assume that the Bills maybe grab control of this game, that's personally where I'm leaning towards tonight. I think the Bills are probably going to win. I'd rather have a Tua over in passing yards. He's at 268.5 on Pinnacle. I believe you had like -125 juice towards the over. I liked the Jalen Waddle prop a little bit more because he was -140 towards the over. So the combination that I got was extremely plus EV, especially because this pays over a 4x payout. And the reason why I like this James Cook over, and if you've been watching my videos, the first few Showdown slates, these overs on touchdowns have been money. In fact, we haven't missed one the entire year. Now, that's not why I'm taking all these props, by the way. If you've been around the videos, you'll know that this Vulture Program they have, but you can see there's little logos behind James Cook. That means that he's a part of the Vulture Program, which means that if Josh Allen scores, he gets refunded or gets completely voided out here for tonight. Now, we haven't had to worry about that. All the guys that we've bet this year for touchdowns have literally all scored. We haven't had any that haven't gone there yet, and knock on wood that doesn't change for tonight. But the thing that we have in our back pocket, and the reason why I've been betting all of those props, is when you have a really good quarterback at scoring touchdowns. That could be a Jalen Hurts, I think, was a great example of that. Other players, rushing quarterbacks, really good backups, like a David Montgomery, for example, right, that could vulture a touchdown out there from Jahmyr Gibbs. A really good spot to take for this Vulture Program, as Josh Allen, for example, has like a 50% touchdown rate out here for tonight. He's almost even money out there to score in most sports books. So that means that 50% of the time, or maybe a little bit less than that, right, if we're adjusting for the VIG out there on books, we'll call it 40% of the time out there in James Cook, you're going to get refunded on this, even if he doesn't score. If he scores and Josh Allen scores, well, guess what? You still hit, right? It's only giving you a little bit of an extra safety net there. And though this payout, it's a 1.39x multiplier, if you took these two props out there on a sportsbook, for example, some of them will pay you around like plus 400 odds, which would be about a 5x payout. So this is a little bit lower than maybe what you get on a sportsbook, but you don't have all of that push equity. You don't have all that chance to get refunded if Josh Allen goes out there and scores, which, like I said, is at least like a 40 percentile sort of outcome. So that's why these overs in this Vulture program, I think, has been so plus EV to start the year. We haven't even had to worry about the backup going out there and scoring, right? And we've gone out there and made it profitable. So just trying to find the right type of situations with this program, I think, could be huge out here for 2024. So hopefully they continue it for the whole season. Hopefully they don't catch on to, the value that they're giving us out there on some of these props. And that's what I'd take out there for my combination. So if you still want to take the over on Jalen Waddle yards, I guess you could, but that was bumped up a whole 3 yards. Personally, if I was entering anything right now, I'd probably go with this over in passing yards, though. So for all the different exposure that I'm getting, though, all the different prop slips that I'm taking out here for Thursday, make sure to check out the Patreon page. We'll have more to come out there before lock. And, of course, for the rest of the NFL season. And the best part about my Patreon page is that it's only $15 a month, and you're not going to get price gouged to shit out there on it. It's $15 a month to give you all the NFL props that I'm doing. If you want to go with just the DFS side out there with the spreadsheet that you saw, it's only $15 a month for that. So very affordable, and it gives you not only what I'm doing for main slate, but all of these showdown slates out there as well. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday night football preview. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for all of your exposure tonight and are ready to get after it and cash out on some of our slips in exposure. Best of luck out there with anything that you guys are getting to. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also comment down below who you've got as the top fantasy scorer on the slate. And if you can get it right, you're also going to have to give me the amount of points that they're going to get in terms of a raw score. If you can get the guy and the score within 1 point, you'll win a free month of my Patreon page. So go ahead, give me your best guess for that top score down below. Personally, I would take Josh Allen. I'll say 26.5 fantasy points. My guess won't count. Just go ahead, give me what you guys are thinking down below. I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of Josh Allen guesses, and may the best guess win. By the way, if you get it within one and multiple people get it within one, it's going to be whoever's the closest. So go out there, give it a go. Go out there, try and win that free month of the Patreon page, which, of course, as I said before, is where you can find all the behind-the-scenes content. We're going to have main slate videos dropping throughout the weekend, also Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football previews, and some showdown and prop content over there for golf. So it's going to be a busy weekend over here on the channel. You'll want to be subscribed so you don't miss any of that when it drops. Best of luck, and I'll catch you guys for the videos throughout the rest of the week.